Hello, everyone. We're back with 123 Chess, and it's a very unique time today because we have a treat to share with you that was based on last week. You probably noticed, for those of you who follow us, that last week we actually weren't uploading anything, and the reason for that is we decided to spice it up and play a 1510 chess.com tournament in which there were, I think, at least 55 people or so, Tom, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool experience, the first rapid tournament of its kind that either of us had done before. And maybe before we start, we each chose a game respectively that we would like to go through from that tournament. So different games from each other. But maybe we'll just share a couple minutes of like what that experience was like, some takeaways from the tournament itself before we go into the games. So Tom, would you like to start your perspective of that?
Sure. I mean, I guess just talking about the tournaments, this was aside from the tournament that we've discussed previously that we just casually did in high school between, our high school peers, like just within our high school. This was the only chess tournament that I have actually ever participated in. This was my first one. I certainly have played with some higher level players in a little bit more like less relaxed atmospheres. The Grand Rapids Chess Club is where I've played. But that's still a pretty loose structure. They meet in a coffee house. This was a unique experience for me, to say the least. But I actually found it to be less, and this might be surprising to hear, Luke, I don't know, but I found it to be less nerve-wracking than I thought it would be. Yeah, I mean, and that could come from my years performing on stage, and I was just like, this is just do what you practice. But that was kind of my perspective. I really did enjoy it. I got some good games in, and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think I had a pretty similar experience. I actually, I would have been probably more nervous than you, but the reason why I wasn't as much as I could have been is because I've done some other tournaments, as you know, online. They've never been rapid tournaments, so they're usually blitz or I don't think I've done any bullet tournaments. But yeah, so usually there's less time in the clock in the ones I play. But as weird as this sounds, it was a little bit more nerve-wracking for me for this one because you couldn't get away with just time-based winning. In all cases, especially as I think one of the coolest things of it is when you're watching games that are still going on after yours are done, or if other people are watching yours, and then you get the kind of like voting for moves thing and stuff people do. But it's really cool because you can kind of really see how people kind of force moves and just kind of, I don't know, it's a really cool experience. You kind of feel like you're a part of something, as if you'd be in a in-person chess club or something when you walk over and watch someone else's table. But it was a really unique experience, and I had a blast as well. So it was good times. Glad we did it.
And before we get too far, I just wanted to point out that we are the same people who you've been watching week after week, in spite of the fact that we both look very different. This is a sign of the times, and our hair has been growing out due to the COVID-19 crisis, and barbershops opened back up for us. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I feel so much lighter weight. I was starting to go for like a white man fro look with like a bush on my head, and it was getting a little bit heavy. So I'm I'm glad to be as is now. Good times.
All
Yeah.
right.
So
Well, cool. I'll kick it off with the game that I picked from my tournament. This is a game I was playing white. I was leading with an E4 opening every game that I was playing white. And I actually saw, this is the Sicilian, I saw I think it was every game where I was playing white, I play E4, and the response was always C5. So I saw this a ton in the tournament, which actually took me a little off guard.
Me too. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the Sicilian. I certainly see the Sicilian. But I'm definitely more comfortable with the response to E4 being E5. If I see E5 or D5, I see a lot of D5 in my blitz games, and so I've responded to those a lot. But yeah, I saw a lot of C5, which just made me think even more. I need to brush up on my Sicilian. But
Open Sicilian, yeah.
This is my typical opening against the Sicilian. Bringing the knights out. I'm not. I don't play a lot of Sicilian. I wasn't really expecting the A6 move there, but it makes sense. It's preventing me from advancing my knights or my bishop to that outpost. It seemed a little defensive to me, but didn't throw me off my plan too much. So bringing in the bishop, just attacking the middle. And then the pawn comes out there, which I was kind of expecting it to come out to E5. Again, not the leading expert on the Sicilian by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't know how far we're straying from, the main lines, if at all. But this indicated to me that my opponent was giving me a little bit of control of the center. And so I looked at capitalizing that. I wanted to bring this pawn into the game. So I castle, and that comes from and I don't know if this is just me being too passive or what, but I will say I am usually very uncomfortable with advancing that F pawn before a castle. And so that was my castle. Was the reason I did that. So bringing knight into the mix. Like I said, I wanted to advance that F pawn, so there I go doing it. My plan is to get that pawn forward one more. I can't do it yet because he has one more piece defending it than I do. So I get my rook into the mix, and then once he pulls his bishop, that allows me to advance the pawn. So there I go. That was my grand plan. This is the move that I identified, move number one, that really is bringing me into a mid game. We've both gotten our openings all set, our pieces arranged the way we want them. We've activated most of our pieces. I've got my bishop still in that back row there, but I have castled my king. So yeah, pushing the pawn forward. And he captures. I take. He's going to move that knight. And then I take.
Man, that happened really fast getting toward the end game there. All those
it did. It was pretty wild. So yeah, once that happened there, I do think that this is a position worth exploring, and I think that I would kind of like to do that a little bit because the material is even here. I mean, if I'm looking at the board, I do like my position right now quite a bit. I've opened up some good lines. I've got the bishop and the queen on this side. This is a pretty mobile bishop there. The forward pawn is nice. But it is isolated as well, and I think that was something that was concerning to me a little bit. But nevertheless, I chose to make the exchange to trade off pieces and just simplify the position. And so I just went heavy into the trade because at this point in time, I saw too, I move up a pawn with that exchange.
Yeah.
So there I am. I'm up the pawn. However, I get the pin here on this diagonal. And that slows my game plan down a little bit. Moving my bishop into the mix to break up that pin. And then he gets his queen into the mix. So a lot of pressure on my knight at this point.
Yeah.
And then this is the next move that I said that I really wanted to break down. I ended up taking there. I knew I had the pawn advantage, and it felt like a good move. I knew I was obviously going to lose a bishop in this exchange, but I saw I'm able to push that pawn forward on this next move. It's defended by my knight, and I do think that I made a little bit of an error at this point, thinking that if he recaptured my pawn, or if he captured my pawn with the bishop, then I was going to be able to recapture with the knight. Not just forgetting about how much pressure then would be on this bishop. That is what I did. And we'll see what ends up happening. So the move that I kind of wanted to investigate a little bit more other than that, and there's time pressure that's built into the tournaments too. So it's not an infinite amount of time to be able to look this up. But a move that just kind of in retrospect I looked at this point was bringing the queen out instead. And I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked into a detailed analysis of how this turns out instead. But what I like about having the queen there is I'm actually threatening to take that pawn now, which that's a pretty deadly attack right there. And now I'm also protecting that bishop with one more piece. And so this diagonal is a lot less scary.
Yeah, he's almost got only two options here now if you had done this, because he'd either have to castle to kind of get out of that, or he would have to start the exchanges himself.
Yeah. I mean, there is the pawn that is hanging here.
True.
But if he takes that, I get my attack in.
Yeah, and your attack is far better than his.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that would have been an interesting move to explore, and I do want to go into that in a little bit more detail in a formal analysis. But this is what I did, and I do think that it was an interesting move, and I actually think it worked out pretty well for me. So he captures, which then ends up giving him a material advantage. I do push that pawn forward, and he takes. And then I knock his king away from his bishop. And I don't know if that was the correct move on his part. I mean, to be fair, like, if he brought his king here, that seems pretty scary once you start getting more exchanges in, right? Because the king's just in the middle of the board, no pawns around him, and I've got a queen and a rook barreling down the center. So I don't know. I really don't know if that was the right move or not. I can understand why he made it though, moving it away. And that's certainly what I was hoping that he was going to do, because then once again that allows me to take that piece. Now he takes my bishop, obviously, knocking my king to the side. So then from here, again, he has a material advantage, but this rook is doing nothing at this point. And the king is pretty weakly defended. I've got my knight there that's already protecting that square, and the bishop threatening to move there. So So I'm geared up pretty nicely. I like the positional advantage. I don't have the material advantage, but I like the positional advantage that I have. My king is pretty safe there in the corner behind my pawns. I've connected these back pieces. So I feel like I'm really geared up for a good attack at this point.
And you have obviously a threat of mate on f8 if his rook is out of there, and then
Right.
a threat of discovery being created with your queen moving to d5 too. Like a
Yes.
lot of fun stuff.
Yeah. Um, so he advances that knight, getting into the center of the board. I end up bouncing my knight back because now there's an attack on it. The queen and his knight. Not ready to make the exchange yet, but he does that, so I take out his bishop then instead. Attacking his knight with 2 pieces. He bounces back, and just like you talked about there, that b5 with the queen. So I move that queen to d5, pinning the knight. And again, we've got just a lot of pressure building up on that queen, which he's able to relieve by pushing that pawn forward. The pin obviously is what's protecting the knight capture. Well, now that I set that up, now I can threaten to take because he hasn't had the opportunity to move his king yet. But that is why he moved that pawn forward, is so he had a place to escape the king to. And this is where I get to equalize the material. Equalize because I had to leave that pawn open there and he captures. So again, we end in this spot, which I felt like this is pretty even. He does have his king in a much safer position now. I do this, knocking his king back, again, keeping his rook out of the game, and then I get to triple my pieces in that file, which just gives me a level of strength. And if he were to, just grab one of these pawns up, sorry, it'd have to be that one, then this threat is going to be too much for him.
Yep.
So he's got to move his queen up, defending that e8 square. And I move up. So this, I put that I was a little unsure about this. I knew that this was going to just create a bunch of forced moves and dwindle off a lot of pieces and get us into an end game that kind of looked like a draw to me. But to be fair, I was playing against some higher level players in this tournament, and so
yeah, there were some good guys.
That I was like, yeah, anyone where I was like, I'm gonna get a draw, I was like, go for a draw. So I did that. I don't know if I probably had a little bit of an advantage going here with his rook locked up there. I've prevented that move there with my queen. And I honestly, I don't know what would have been, an alternative option at this point in time.
I think maybe E7. Yeah, I was gonna say I think E7 because just the sheer fact of having it on the, the 7th rank is just a general principle of wonderful beauty.
Yeah, rook on the 7th rank is usually a very dangerous thing in chess. And then bumping my queen up to there. I'm now threatening checkmate, though that's in line with his king, so maybe that's not the place to go. So I don't know, maybe G4 or something like that. Just being able to put the pressure on that pawn, which is now only defended by the king. I really have the upper hand in terms of an attack going at this point in time, and honestly, the going with the material exchange is probably not the best way to go, but that's where I went. Simplify the board, simplify the board.
End game.
Yeah. And then he goes here, and you know, this was again one more chance to really just maybe potentially utilize my more active rook. And I think this would have also been a pretty good option because, you know, I'm again, rook in the 7th rank. I am threatening to take that piece at this point in time. He could do one of two things. He could advance it, or he could defend it with his rook. If I did that. But instead, I like simplifying, going for a draw. So I just capture. Once I got to this position, I felt pretty confident this was going to be a draw. And for now, you know, name the game, get your king into the center of the board. Kings are both in the center of the board. He's trying to advance some pawns. Nobody can advance their pawn too far, otherwise it's going to get captured. Doing a little bit of dance with our kings, because I don't want him gaining the advantage. What's opposition?
Opposition, yeah.
In the middle, yeah. And so we're just dancing around until he ends up going off, picking one side that he wants to go to. I moved the pawn forward at this point in time because if he moved back, whatever, we're still in the same sort of game that we were in. I wanted to move that pawn forward to prevent him from moving his pawn any farther forward. I wanted to have less space that my king needed to go. And I felt even happier once he did this because now I can just charge ahead. So that's what I do. But as soon as I'm charging ahead, he's charging ahead.
Oh, man.
And then we clear it off.
Wow.
We're moving forward. And he's actually going to get the queen before me, but I am not in the diagonal of his queen. So we both get queens. This is a draw as long as nobody plays poorly. And he gave it a chance to see if I would just throw the game. The name of the game here is you don't want to have him be able to either A, get you in checkmate, or B, somehow capture your queen. I was not going to let that happen. We dance, and then he accepted a draw.
Wow.
So that was my game. Yeah. So I guess just to go over those moments. This was one. This was the real attack that I started to transition into mid-game play. You know, I didn't notate it, but I do think that this one's worth commenting after. I think this is, I'm going to jot myself a note right now, even though it's out of order. I do think that this was a move that was really worth exploring because I really could have let this sit a little bit longer, I think. You know, maybe bring my bishop out. I don't know. That's me spitballing because now he could take my.
Also, I think the most forcing move here is knight takes c6. And the interesting thing with that is if he takes it with his, well, that wouldn't work though because then he's got the queen backing up the d file too. I was wondering if it would be a way to force him to isolate his pawns, but I don't know if it's going to be very effective for that. So never mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting defense. There's a lot going on with all those minor pieces in the middle of the board there. So
yeah,
definitely worth exploring. And hopefully I can find something that's similar to this game too. and that's been explored by some people.
Yeah. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar, if you're if you're a mid-level player and you haven't played the Sicilian, you're a rarity in this day and age. But if you haven't, then I would just say the Sicilian, one of the reasons why it's so popular is because it instantly attacks the center uh, with a non-central pawn, which is why it's so effective usually for gaining black potential, because now you have allegedly 3 pawns that can actually go for central control, and the weakness can potentially be your king side being a little bit frail, but it's so aggressive because of having another pawn already that it's why it's so popular.
Yeah, and so then the last one that we were looking at was this one here, which was my bishop sacrifice that I initiated. And I had said I was exploring that one, and I don't know. In further analysis, maybe I'll find another move that I like even better than that one. But yeah, that was kind of my game. I don't think I notated this one either, but the debt exchange that I did and with here, going from here. Because I do think that I really did have a pretty strong advantage here. And I think capitalizing on it would have been a good way to turn a draw into a win. So
Yeah.
those are the ones that I really want to explore a little bit further. But yeah,
Nice.
I'll pass the mic to Luke.
Yeah, that was interesting. Thanks, Tom. All right. So for mine, unlike Tom's, mine was actually a very very kind of traditional opening. So mine was actually the Scotch, and you guys are probably familiar with a previous video where we went through the Scotch against each other. So here we go. And very main line. Up to this point, I pretty much played simultaneously against the game, our game 3. So then he takes. So up to this point, completely book moves. And he did play that traditional one. I remember in the game that Tom and I were going through, we were basically talking about what if they did the main line like this. Well, this guy did. And then I castled, and I remember that was exactly based on that review that we did. So that was kind of fun for me. Okay, so now what's the main thing that I need to keep in mind? Well, when am I going to advance the D pawn? That's kind of that, plus when am I going to advance the H pawn to prevent the opponent pin? And then also what to do about this bishop here. And so interestingly enough, I was very hasty with this move. When I took his knight, it was actually quite unfortunate because I realized as the next few moves progressed, the taking of the knight was actually a really really big disadvantage for me for pretty much the whole rest of the game, as you'll see here. So really what happened here is let me back up for a moment. So now that my opponent has castled, obviously we want to bring our rooks into the game. And just keep in mind the simple fact that with this pin, that's impossible. So it's got to be addressed, and usually it would be addressed by, kicking my bishop back with the pawns, something like that. In which case, then he would probably end up right back here where he would want to be against the king. That's a lot of arrows. So yeah, that's basically kind of the theme here in this opening. The black bishop usually wants to be on this diagonal. That's kind of a pretty common thing in the Scotch. And so, okay, so then after I took it, my idea was double his pawns. But again, here we go with the double pawns thing again. It's doubling pawns is great, but you gotta justify it. It's gotta be a better option than an alternative. And not having the bishop pair was a little bit of a weakness for me. And so then now, okay, so at this point, I was trying to think, okay, so right now I have the initiative kind of. And so the idea is my candidate moves are, again, advancing this to prevent the pin, or I could advance this pawn. I knew that I didn't, now remember the last time that I reviewed a Scotch game, the one I played against Tom, my problem is it took forever for me to advance this pawn, and it really hurt me as this one came and kicked my knight and everything else. So I decided to go for this. Now, and again, this is me playing very conservatively, and it's unfortunate because my opponent played conservatively as well. And why that's bad is because he had the bishop pair, and he, as you'll see, placed them on very awesome diagonals, which just created havoc on my king side. So right here, once I advance this pawn, now he's already preventing my knight advance. Now I finally do that. Okay. Right here, I felt very uncomfortable because we all know what's coming. This pawn moving up and this bishop becoming the best minor piece on the board. So that was the threat there. And at this point, my thought process was, okay, so this is now becoming the most powerful minor piece on the board. With that in mind, I can't just let him have it for free. I got to do something to put some pressure in that area so that we can kind of equalize the position more. So what did I decide? I decided to go with moving my rook to at least force him to move his rook, and then we'll be kind of at a standstill. That's what happened. But again, I knew he would do that. So by me moving my rook there, I'm actually basically allowing him to use that move to get where he wanted anyway. And then I am the first one to claim this file. Not what's the threat here? Take. So I have two pieces against versus his one. But this move right here I didn't actually mention anything in the comments, but I definitely want to take a closer look uh, at this previous move here when I moved my rook, because this queen advance right here basically gave him the upper hand. Um, we now have both bishops getting ready to have open lines toward my king side. We have a queen that is bearing down that way as well, and she'll probably want to slide right over to go after my king. And so he's just got a very powerful position unfolding. So I decided to go for my queen, which again, I don't like it that my queen is in front of my bishop. That's kind of unfortunate. And at this point, I'm thinking, wow, I probably should have advanced this too to actually go for the center there. Again, I really am. I mean, it's really good that actually, Tom, that I'm playing so many Scotch games, because again, as you mentioned before, it's a great, simple, very obvious, like what your desire is as white to play. And it's really good for people like me that are more positional. I like queen pawn games. So the fact that I'm getting more experience in this is just kind of really forcing me to wrestle with the obvious things that I just need to work out and not, not fall into. So you're going to see, I mean, as you've probably already seen, there's some similar problems I have here as the Scotch game I played before. All right, it's been opened. Not good. It's already a threat because take, and then now I have an isolated pawn here. And I mean, this is, now he's not going to probably do that because obviously that is, like I said, the most powerful minor piece. But still, if this, it's not good. Okay, so I decided I don't want him to have, to give me doubled pawns and destroy my king side defense. And he did what he would have wanted to do anyway. He moved his queen in the perfect spot. Okay. Okay, this move right here. This was interesting because I knew I wanted to make sure my queen is helping protect both this square and this square. But there's two places that I can protect it from. And I think if I were to review it again, which I think I'm going to, I think the better move would have been here. And the reason is because if by moving it there, I just have more, I'm covering more territory in the sense that um, it's the white diagonal is really not helpful for the queen right now. And I think that especially with, okay, let's say this pawn moves, then he's got uh, bishop and queen going there. So then he's got a skewer on my queen to rook. Okay, so that's just one idea. There's a lot of other ideas too. But now, okay, so I went here. And actually this move right here, uh, just stopping and taking a close look at what's going on. So he is threatening to take my, probably this pawn. He's also opened up the bishop diagonal, and he's also protecting the pawn with this bishop too. Furthermore, he also, if he wants to take this way, he's also got a double attack going with the queen protecting as well. So again, this is so painful for me because unlike your game, Tom, where it was kind of like you had the upper hand, but it ended up as a draw. For me, this was my worst game of the tournament. Like I definitely like, I mean, we'll just show you the next move. So very defensive, very protective. I gave up my rook's file, and I'm just giving multiple pieces, a way of protecting that pawn. Very pointless move, really, because as you can see, the obvious take, there we go. Now he got another pawn. So he's one pawn up, and a queen right here is looking pretty devastating. And my rooks aren't connected yet. So I pretty much had only one good move here with this bishop moving to e6. And of course, what's he going to do? Well, you know it.
Why do you move bishop to b7?
To b7? Yeah, so let's see. So if I move my bishop to b7, I think one of the problems with that is, just trying to think through. Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, I'm just seeing down the line you've got the attack. You're attacking the pawn in front of his king as well.
Yeah, that is interesting. So that could have been a potential option as well. Now this was my desperado. This was my last ditch effort to try to equalize the position. I knew that he had the upper hand by a long shot, but I thought, okay, this is my opportunity to try to gain. So I'm attacking his queen, but what is my real goal is to double up my rooks so that I can go for a double tack and hopefully take his bishop. So he moves the queen out of the way. But again, okay, so now one thing for sure is going to happen. If I just go with my original plan, which I pretty much have to do now. I mean, one thing I could do is I could advance this pawn. But again, that's opening up this. I mean, yeah, there's a lot going on here. This whole scenario makes me very uncomfortable just because of how open it is. But yeah, anyway, I think what I ended up doing is that this move here with my knight was, I actually wanted to also do something over here. I have two pieces hitting that square, but I just wasn't sure how to use it yet. So he moved his queen back, which I was actually shocked of how far back he went with it. But then I doubled up the rooks and I thought, aha, now I'm attacking the bishop. Now I can hopefully, but yeah, an obvious defense that basically just totally. Now, one good thing about this is you see how now this piece became a lot weaker. So this piece now has no, like he has to move 2 moves to get it to actually go toward that diagonal. So this actually helped me a lot more than I realized during the game. This move right here, I think was, I need to look at it in the chess engine eventually, but I think this was a blunder, because the reason why is because I think, well, number one, if I, what am I threatening? Like if I want to take here, sure, that's a doubled pawn, so it's not really that great. I don't know, but then again, what if I did something like this? Oops.
About that, yeah.
You know, because look at that. Now he's got, it's completely opened up. I understand I'm behind in material, but still that's pretty, and then right here, if I decide to move my, now I could either protect it, but if I even moved here, now I'm hitting his biggest attacker with the queen. So, but at the same time, the real purpose of that would be to have, you know, knights near a king with your queen are really good for getting quick early checkmates in the mid game. So especially with an open position like this. Yeah, so that's something that I was thinking that could have been pretty nifty. So this move right here, actually, Tom, this move kind of reminded me of our game 1 when I had a knight sitting there in the open, and that one little prick with the pawn was all that was needed to kind of thwart the whole idea. So I had only, I mean, where do you go? Where do you go? It. So here we go, back to h7. And look, we're where we were before, except, oh, there's one problem. Now this pawn is guarding this square. So that's unfortunate. And now this right here was basically just me saying, okay, you're going to take that piece, but maybe I can get a pawn or something. And he takes it. I move back. This was actually really cool watching how he created this mating web. It was really, so right here, keep in mind, I have 2 different places I can move my king to. Also, I have 1 means of blocking if he checks me with the queen, and that's my queen. But check out what he does here. So very simple, you know, bishop. So then this only leaves me with 2 options: either block it with my rook, which I didn't want to do, or move my king again. And check that out. Pretty nice, huh?
Awesome.
I like, that was pretty cool. So, you know, at this point I was kind of more entertained than anything. I was just like, oh, how's this gonna end for me? This is gonna be, yeah. So then I go here and checkmate. A really pretty checkmate, actually.
I like that he went with checkmate there, because this is the point in time in a game where I'm just like, okay, gobble up material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I ignore looking for checkmates at this point, and I just started taking the. I would have taken the queen with the bishop.
I know. So that was like really, but again, like you said, Tom, we were playing a lot higher level players. And the cool thing about this tournament was some of these players are lower rated, but technically they're way better players, because a lot of these people, they play tournaments a lot. And when you're playing an open tournament, you can play anyone's skill level. So you're being placed against potentially, you know, theoretically like 1800, 1900 level players. So class A or better. And that was really cool for, you know, to have that opportunity. And I think it's something I need to prioritize more. So just real quickly, back to my few moves that I want to take a closer look at. This one right here. So I want to see what other options I had instead of taking the knight, because again, this bishop is really a strong piece for me, and there's many reasons why having this on the board is can just really provide me some attacking potential, so I'm not just defending the whole time like ended up happening. Okay, and then the second move that I really want to look at is, okay, so then right here with my rook, instead of moving my rook here, I want to take a look at what, you know, if there's any other types of things I should have done. I mean, in all honesty, if I go back to where I advanced this pawn, I probably should have advanced it to here. This is a thematic element of the Scotch game, and you can advance it one, but the problem with doing that is it doesn't really, it doesn't do enough to, to do the most powerful pawn on the board, even though it's isolated, is this. So you got to kind of contest that right away as black if you don't want white to constantly have the initiative in the Scotch.
And I think that the concern that like you feel playing as black, not
Mm-hmm.
moving forward two, is if you move forward two, it's like, well, if I move it forward two, what if he advances the pawn? Exactly. But
Yep.
the thing is, at that point in time, okay, bump your pawn. You put it there. I mean, I feel like you could probably put it at e4, right? And then
Mm.
he wants to trade. Then now he's knocking off his bishop.
Yeah.
And that pawn that he's got, that e5 pawn now, doesn't look that stable
No,
anymore.
it doesn't. Yeah, so I agree, and I think one of the things when I was studying the Scotch a little bit, this actually is um, oops. So when you advance it like that and they go for this, this is a thematic move right here. It's probably the most common. There are some traps too that I'm vaguely familiar with earlier on. We didn't get to it in this because we had a different move order. But if I hadn't taken it as knight, there's some other stuff that could have happened. But yeah, so there's like Tom pointed out, there's a couple spots for my knight to go. And the concern of your opponent advancing their pawn to kick your piece, just look, if I were to look at it and say, okay, so let's assume he is going to move that. Where do I go? Are either of those spots good spots? And what would the position look like, after that if we exchanged? That is, again, I really am not good at that. And I need to get better at looking at those, because most, like in higher level chess, the higher level players a lot of times don't just advance the pawns. So but mid-level players do, so it's a legitimate concern for mid-level. Higher level, they know that that's actually going to hurt them later on usually. But case in point, I need to really get better at just really being confident with advancing and forgetting about the whole doubled pawns dealing and all those things, when in actuality what I'm trying to do is equalize the position as black. So that was my next place. And then the last one I'm going to look at real quickly is right. Okay, so where was it? No, I'm losing my train of thought. Oh yeah, right here. So I already had this threat going, and then now this right here, though he guarded it with another piece, he at the same time made it really weak now. And this is what I want to look at right here. So I think those are going to be good solid choices for me to look into in more depth. But even though you didn't really see many tangible signs of my improvement with the Scotch, the fact that I'm encountering the same themes over and over and over again, looking at this multiple times, is forcing me, like a piano student, having to make sure to unlearn the wrong notes that they're playing. That's exactly what I'm doing, and I think the Scotch is a perfect place to begin with that. So yeah, so that's mine. Key takeaways or lessons.
Why don't you start? Run yours.
Okay. So I think my key lesson, one of them I kind of mentioned already, but just the idea of, because again, I'm trying to make this apply to not just the Scotch, but the threat of pawn advance. Um, if the center is, has some weaknesses, and is pretty open, especially in a position, uh, a lot of times it's likely it would be earlier on in a game. My one lesson is, again, not being afraid to be confident with contesting for the center, and knowing that a pawn advance in and of itself, just because it's going to kick your minor piece away, or major for that matter, doesn't necessarily mean it's actually going to be better for your opponent in the long run. So just look at the next move and say, okay, where would I go? What would the position look like after? So who does it actually help in the end? Does it equalize the position? or does it favor one or the other? So that's my first key lesson regarding pawn advances. My second key lesson is what to do with the initiative. So right here, as I mentioned, this move exemplifies the concept of I pretty much have the initiative. I'm black, but now I don't know. Would you say I have the initiative, Tom? It's hard for me to define that in some cases, but the point is, right now, it's my choice to decide how much I want to open things up. And white is actually, honestly, more defending right now. They don't really. The opponent doesn't really have any active pieces. He has some potential for that, and the one active piece is the knight, which could encounter a pin. So it's almost like he's got to kick my bishop away or get his dark bishop into the game. And so right here again, I really think this is just it's so simple,
Yeah,
but
I like that.
when I have the initiative like this, they say that when if you're the one who's kind of more ahead in development, or you have the initiative, a lot of times, not always, then what you want to do is open up the position, kind of start attacking. Don't lose the momentum that you're already having, because I played really well up to this point, and I feel like doing something like that instead of taking his knight probably would have been a solid option for me, and would have forced him to react to me instead of creating his own plan in a very passive way, which I was doing as well. So that's my number two. And I really think I'm just going to stick with those two this time, because I want to keep it simple and make sure that I'd rather have two lessons that I really learn well than five that I don't really remember. I always have a problem with that. So
Mine, I would say, I mean, just an overall, I do need to brush up on my Sicilian a little bit. Just seeing how common it was. Um, I have brought up this before. Castling, just timing on it. I legitimately, I don't know if this was the right time or not. I don't know if I could have delayed it just a little bit further, and had one turn earlier that I was pushing that pawn forward. But then this move here really is the one of my takeaways, which was just not necessarily jumping to piece exchange. I think that was something that I did a lot in this game, was just simplifying the position, and that's something that we had talked about a few games ago, which was don't necessarily jump for simplifying the position. If you're going to relieve the pressure, have a good reason for doing it. I mean, my reason there obviously was I wanted to pick up that material advantage, which I think was fair. But when we get further down the game, to this point here, I just go for the exchange. And once again, I didn't have a really good reason for simplifying the position at this point in time. And I think this is even a better example of it. This move was just because I do feel like my advantage at this point in the game is pretty clear.
yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, so
I loved how you got to this point. Before you move the rook, oh man, I'm getting so excited looking at the options you would have. It's cool.
yeah. So yeah, that'll definitely be the thing that I really want to dissect.
Awesome. Yeah, so that is, guys, our review of these games. And then next week, of course, as you know, will be the analysis. It'll be interesting too. If we want to do Grandmaster games, we might each do a different one.
Yeah, we could.
And then, of course, it'll be, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. And the tournament was a really good experience for both of us. and very enriching. And I think we each played stronger players than we do usually, which was really exciting. So, all right, anything else you want to add, Tom?
I don't think so. Thanks for joining us and keep practicing, guys.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.